There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve.
And now a reading from Edward Thomas, World War I poet. This is no case of petty right or wrong. This is no case of petty right or wrong that politicians or philosophers can judge. I hate not Germans, nor grow hot with love of Englishmen to please newspapers. Besides my hate for one fat patriot, my hatred of the Kaiser is love true. A kind of god he is, banging a gong. But I have not to choose between the two, or between justice and injustice. Dinned with war and argument, I read no more than in the storms smoking along the wind. Althart the wood, two witches' cauldrons roar. From one the weather shall rise clear and gay, out of the other an England beautiful, and like her mother that died yesterday. Little I know or care if, being dull, I shall miss something that historians can rake out of the ashes when perchance the phoenix broods serene above their ken. But with the best and meanest Englishmen I am one in crying, God save England, lest we lose what never slaves and cattle blessed. The ages made her that made us from dust. She is all we know and live by, and we trust she is good and must endure, loving her so. And, as we love ourselves, we hate her foe. That was This Is No Case of Petty Right or Wrong by Edward Thomas from Poems of the Great War, 1914 to 1918. Checking out the price of Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin is up 0.27% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 11,649, a high of 11,709, and a low of 11,538. That's $1 for 8,584 Satoshis. Volume is at 1,964 Bitcoins changing hands, and the market continues to lean long, with 76% of the market heading that direction. Bitcoin dominance is at 59.68%. And this is Big Book Sunday. And you know what that means. I've got a big book right here. It's kind of the only big book I brought with me. I'm visiting California right now, trying to get things set up out here. And, of course, staying inside, avoiding first the virus and now the virus and the smoke. So we have lots of great reasons to stay inside. Today's big book is by Stephen Shore, and it's called Uncommon Places, The Complete Works. And Stephen Shore is a photographer, so this is a book of photography, mainly from America, mainly from the 1970s. And we're going to compare it to Robert Frank's The Americans, as well as some other great works of photography and photography books. What's interesting about this book, as you can see from the cover, is it's a lot of ordinary shots, right? A lot of just, those are old cars. That's an old restaurant. I've never been to Sambo's. Sounds interesting. Wink, wink. And it's all about seeing things that you might not see. And it's about the age of things and just how a normal shot like this, you can't do now. If you wanted to do this shot, you'd have to arrange all those cars. You'd have to repaint all those buildings. It wouldn't be there. The passing of time has erased these cars in this 1970s. So we're going to check out that big book. But we've also got other books for you here. It's a smorgasbord of books today on Big Book Sunday. Gonna drink some water here, take a break. Excuse me. Now is a good time to like the show, give it a thumbs up and a share, and join us in the chat. Say hi, chat. Hi, chat. There we go. So we've got books, and we've got books today on Sunday. It's an all-book show. It's going to be about books. First, I want to talk just briefly about the books I've been reading recently. I just finished up the I Want My MTV book. I'd been wanting to read that for a long time. It's about a 1,200, 1,400 oral history of MTV. That means it's all interviews. So it's interviews with all the people who built MTV, a lot of the people who were on MTV and therefore profited by MTV. And it covers kind of the whole thing from the early beginnings as a music video platform into what happened after, and pretty much all the original people leave. So it's a very cool book. I'd wanted to read it since it came out. And it transitions well into the next book I read, although I guess it's not showing up on my read books list, but I happen to have it right here. So let's check it out. It is Daily Show, the book. I don't have the cover on it right now, so it's kind of blue. But this is the oral history of The Daily Show. That means that it's interviews with all the different correspondents on The Daily Show, a lot of the people who were in the news, a couple of comments from John McCain here and there, Romney, so on and so forth. Just a lot of great interviews, and as you can see from the side, a lot of markings, meaning that I really enjoyed this book, and there was a lot I took from this. So, of course, for me, reading the Daily Show book is like reminding you of when you grew up, and the horrors of the Iraq War and the Bush presidencies, and that we wouldn't have been able to make it through without Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart's sarcasm, his satire, his voice, and as well as all the work of the good people who wrote the Daily Show and the correspondents and everyone else. They made this possible. They helped us survive. Another book I read recently is The Hackerspace Blueprint, or The Hackerspace Manifesto. This was an interesting but short book. I think I got it for maybe $1 on Amazon, something like that. It's supposed to be free, but it's good to cover the costs of converting it into an ebook or whatever it was. And it's a great little roundup of how to run a hackerspace. You'll be interesting to note, at first, they tried democracy for their hackerspace. The hackerspace quickly fell apart and almost crashed and burned. They came back with a slightly better strategy. They're going to have a board of directors. The board is then legally responsible for the hackerspace, so the board would then enforce the safety rules. The safety rules and the not stealing rules, probably the most important rules of the hackerspace. The other problems they ran into was interpersonal problems, which they would again refer to the board. They had a good solution to deal with it, but they found that democracy didn't work to solve their interpersonal problems, and they also found that things would just run apart without someone in charge, without someone holding it together. So that's how they suggest you run your hackerspace. The document's open source, it's online, you can add to it, you can get the latest version, and it's really interesting if you're thinking about running a hackerspace or any kind of shared group space. According to this list, I also read The Jordan Rules, which was an interesting book. Of course, I read it alongside with the fantastic Michael Jordan documentary that I'm sure everyone's watched or is now watching, that it's come to Netflix, The Last Dance. This book is referenced in the documentary. This is the book that angers Michael about the media. So it's interesting to read it and get that behind the scenes. It's about one season. I think it's the first season that the Bulls win the championship, just happened to luck out. And Sam Smith is an author, a sports writer traveling with the team. trying to manage my voice here, trying to do a good job. But you never know how you're going to talk when you don't talk for a long time and then you try to talk. So doing the best we can here. Got a water bottle and a cough drop. I'm doing fine. I'm not sick. I know every drop of every bucket somebody gets sick. But no, I'm staying inside. I think it's the smoke outside. That California's on fire. And just in general, not used to talking a lot. Trying to stick in there. Trying to provide a quality book experience for you here. I can sense that you're drifting and that you need a shot of big book. So here we go. Let's see if we can find a good picture to look at. Not the one from the front cover, though. Get me something different. Oh, I like this one here on the left. Let's look at that. You can see kind of a normal, everyday streetscape. Yeah, you can see the old car in the background. And you can see also deserted. A lot of photographers, street photographers, like these deserted shots. You really get to focus on the buildings, on the plants, on everything else that's going on there. I've certainly been vying for these myself. If I look through my museum pictures, they're almost ruined if a person is in them. Here's a painting hanging on the wall. And here's looks like an old television. A lot of these shots were shot in hotel rooms. They're from 1974, and they're pictures of hotel rooms, which is interesting because you wouldn't even notice a hotel room, right? It's the kind of thing you would just walk by. You would stay in once, you would move along down the road. But thanks to this artist who took pictures of them, people who've never stayed in a hotel room in the 70s, like myself, can now experience what it must be like. You can see here, as well as the square buildings, the blue sky, looks like kind of a deserted town. One can only imagine so many years later what the town looks like now. Probably about 45, 50 years ago, these pictures. So checking out Uncommon Places by Stephen Shore. The complete works of his photography. And I don't know if it's an interesting story, but I saw this book once in a San Francisco bookshop up in the Richmond neighborhood, and I wanted it. It was expensive. It was like $50 or something. So I didn't buy it. I put it on my Amazon wish list, which is what I'm supposed to do when I want a book, but I can't afford it. Even looking at it right now, the cover price on the back says $65. We see people in the chat are digging the old cars. I totally agree. It's a 70s kind of photo book, and a lot of it is about the cars. I mean, this shot's interesting because it's a Sambo restaurant, which we used to have in Sacramento, and there used to be lots of them in California. Let me see if I can find a good picture. I don't know, a lot of deserted streetscapes really here. But yeah, I put it on my wish list. I thought about it. I kept looking at the price. It kept being expensive. And then at one point, it became, well, relatively cheap. It was like $35, which is a good deal for a photo book like this. This is difficult for them to print. They probably didn't print that many. It says, John F. Kennedy says, art is truth. So I picked it up, and the complaints on the Amazon are right, as they usually are. The book is not very well bound. It's kind of coming apart already, and it's brand new. And you can see some old buildings there. Just kind of it's interesting to think about. This one here is from 1977, but boy, it looks a lot older. Look at the 50-cent paperback rack. I can see some of the book titles. I don't recognize. Actually, one of the front is The Pearl by John Steinbeck. That's pretty strange. But yeah, you can see there. I'm going to zoom in. Here you go. Hold on. Enhance. Just barely. Oh, well. You can kind of see the edge of the paper book rack there. It's fun to see that old Steinbeck book. I used to have a paperback copy of that somewhere. Oh, here's a good one. This is from November 11th, 1977. So a couple years before my time, and certainly before my, remembering things. There's a McDonald's meal from 1977. And you wouldn't think it would mean anything. These things should just stay the same, right? But look at that styrofoam container. That is gone. They do not do that anymore. But they used to throw out tons and tons of styrofoam at McDonald's. One of the biggest promotions of my youth, other than, of course, the McDonald's Monopoly game, which became even more fun recently when we found out that someone had been rigging it. And there's a big documentary about that called McMillions. You can check out on HBO. But yeah, other than the McDonald's game, there was a big sandwich back in the day, the McDLT, and it was the hot side stays hot and the cool side stays cool. And they would put the burger on one side and they would put the lettuce and the tomato and the bun on the other. Then you'd use the styrofoam container to push the two together. I don't know why that made such a big deal, but it was a fast food burger that you push together. I don't know why that would do anything for you. But yes, they never made any McDLTs after they lost the ability to make endless amounts of wasteful styrofoam. So probably a good thing. There's another car shot, maybe a car sales lot. All these cars were for sale. Think about just the colors of these cars, how the colors of cars have changed since the 70s, not just because of the film, so on and so forth. But just an interesting book. Again, I don't have it with me, unfortunately. It's in my library at home, but it reminds me a lot of Robert Frank's The Americans, which is a similar kind of book. He drove around America. He took pictures of things. But Frank's is from the 50s, and this book is from the 70s. So it's really interesting to see how things changed. Same kind of thing. Robert Frank goes around taking pictures of abandoned diners, busted up cars, the occasional person. My favorite picture from that book is a close-up picture of a person holding a sousaphone, a marching tuba, and the sousaphone part is where their face would be. So it's just like a bell person. I don't know. It's a very strange photo. You'll know it when you see it. But there it is, a little bit more of Uncommon Places by Stephen Shore. Sorry if the quality's not good. I can kind of see out of the corner of my eye where I'm holding this. So, but that's just to keep it going here on Big Book Day, because we've got books big and small. This is a smaller book. This is called Creative Inspiration by Vincent van Gogh. And I got it at the Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, if we want to go that way in the original Klingon, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. It's a magnificent museum. It's kind of interesting. I don't have any photos from it. I did a unique thing that day. I did a no photo day, and I took a vacation from taking pictures of every darn thing. And of course, I ended up buying this book. But it's a neat book. It has these pencil sketches of Van Gogh on one side, and it has kind of a quotation or something from the letters. A lot of letters from his brother, Theo. This is fun stuff anyway. It's from Amsterdam. Everything from Amsterdam is fun. There's the Unity Cup 2017 sticker. I don't know what that was from. And then this came from the bread shop, or the Brot shop. And especially fun, I got some Bananenbrod, which I guess Brot is German, so broad or broad is the Dutch translation of the word bread. So it helps. Here's something randomly from Van Gogh. It's about community. He says, "People strengthen each other when they work together, and an entity is formed without personality having to be blotted out by the collaboration." Interesting about people working together. Here's another one. I'll show you the picture first. And it says, "We have, by turns, beautiful, clear autumn days here, and stormy ditto. Actually, I find the latter to be the most beautiful, even though they make it more awkward to work outdoors, even though it's sometimes completely impossible to do so. All the same, going out and reworking a study one has made on a fine day in accordance with one sees outdoors in the rain can be done, and it satisfies me. There's Van Gogh talking about the challenge of painting in the rain and the effect of weather on painting and scenes. And you can see kind of a weather-wrecked tree there, the brushes. Interesting stuff. So, and it flips to the same page. Let's see, there's one more. The sea, which I love very dearly, needs to be attacked with painting. Otherwise, one has no grip on it. And I think he's talking about the waves and the rapid way in which the sea would move, how difficult it would be for even an artist like Van Gogh to capture it. So, very cool, interesting little book here. Van Gogh, Creative Inspiration. And of course, earlier I read from Poems of the Great War, which I got in London at the War Museum, the London War Museum, the Imperial War Academy, something like that. It was a fantastic museum, though very, very sad in the end. Started off much more goofy with like the kind of, giant tanks and giant artillery and machines, things that you could really get behind. On the third or fourth floor, it got a lot sadder with the results of those machines, and of course, specifically the results of what happened in Germany. So, fantastic museum, though. Just because you leave sad doesn't mean that it doesn't have value, right? Here's a book here I'm reading, just started, called How to Reform Capitalism. This is one of the School of Life books, and I learned recently that you can buy School of Life books on Amazon, so you don't even have to go to the School of Life in Amsterdam or one of the other locations. And I even got a good deal, and I didn't have to pay more for having a super heavy suitcase, so this worked out good. This one's called How to Reform Capitalism, and I'll try to find a couple of these here. He's talking about an installation in a supermarket. This artist has recreated the supermarket experience, except that all the items are empty, and you can bring them up to the counter and you can pay for them and you can scan them, and then you go home with empty items and you just have to buy more things. Are you getting it? Are you getting the metaphor? It's it's very simple, but it's a very clever piece. It's by Zhu Zhen, and it's called Shang Art Supermarket. It was an installation from 2007 and 2014. And it says here that the supermarket installation takes us on a journey. At first, it gets us to share the artist's excitement around supermarkets. Then, it punctures the illusion. It's a giant, deliberate letdown. It's significant that Zhu Zhen's critique of supermarkets is ironic. We tend to become ironic around things that we feel disappointed by, but don't feel we'll ever be able to change. It's a maneuver of disappointment, stoically handled. Figured I'd give you guys a second, let that one kind of sink in there. I thought it was a really clever thing. He says, we tend to become ironic around things that we feel disappointed by, but don't feel we'll ever be able to change. Powerful insight, talking about much more than just capitalism here, right? Oh, now this was interesting. There's a company in the UK called Sainsbury's, and I'm probably saying it wrong. It's probably Sainsbury. But I went there a couple of times. It's a grocery store. They've got your food and what have you. Kind of a smaller, more of a mini-mart grocery store, not a supermarket, at least the one I went to. And the Sainsbury family are also philanthropists, and they're into art. And they have this giant, looks like a warehouse of an art gallery here. Must be great, right? Has lots of cool stuff. But what the artist or what the author here points out is he talks about the differences between how they run their art versus how they run their business. And he says that when they run their business, they give you the food. It's the basic food. They send you the price. So it's funny here. So let me start with the quote. So he says, "The philanthropist has been imagined as a person who makes a lot of money in the brutish world of commerce, with all the normal expectations of maximizing returns, squeezing wages, and focusing on obvious opportunities, and then makes a clean break. In their spare hours, they can devote their wealth to projects that are profoundly non-commercial, the patient collection of Roman coins, Islamic vases, or modern sculptures. But the philanthropist knows that if they ever took an art-loving attitude to their businesses, they might suffer economic collapse. Instead of making big things happen in the real world, they would become mere artists who make interesting little things in the sheltered, subsidized world of the gallery." It's interesting, huh? He says, "The situation is strangely tantalizing. The artist finds a little that is lovable and much that's wrong around supermarkets, but can't imagine running or bringing the ideals of art into action in one. The supermarket owners love art, but can't imagine bringing their psychologically and aesthetically ambitious sides into focus with their business. These two parties are both like pioneers at the edges of unexplored territory. There is a huge idea that they are both circling around. The goal is a synthesis of business and art, a supermarket that was truly guided by the ideals of art, a capitalism that could be compatible with the higher values of humanity." It's interesting, huh? This book is How to Reform Capitalism from the School of Life. And it's not very big, unfortunately. We do have the big book you might have missed earlier. And we'll come back to in a minute. Today's big book is Uncommon Places by Stephen Shore, and it's a book of photography, mainly focusing on the 1970s. So if you dig it, you're going to dig it. If you don't dig it, so it goes. Another book that I bought recently from my Amazon School of Life spree was this book called The School of Life. And again, it's written by the same person or the same team over at the School of Life. And it's introduced by Elaine D. Bottom, who I think is the main philosopher. He might have started the whole thing over there. I really don't understand how it runs yet, but I'm interested, right? And in this book, so far, some of the quotes that I've gathered, he was talking about the combination of religion and culture and the idea in the 19th century in Europe. He says, many commentators wondered where humanity would, in an increasingly secular future, find the guidance that religions had once provided. Where would ethical counsel come from? How would self-understanding be achieved? What would determine our sense of purpose? To whom would we turn in despair? One answer, hesitantly and then increasingly boldly articulated, came to the fore. Culture. Culture could replace Scripture. There was, it was proposed, a convincing set of substitutes for the teaching of the faith in the canon of culture. The plays of Sophocles and Racine, the paintings of Botticelli and Rembrandt, the literature of Goethe and Baudelaire, the philosophy of Plato and Schopenhauer, the musical compositions of Liszt and Wagner. These would provide the raw material from which an adequate replacement for the guidance and consolation of the faiths could be formulated. With this idea in mind, An unparalleled investment in culture followed in ever less faithful nations. Vast numbers of libraries, concert halls, college humanity departments, and museums were constructed around the world with the conscious intention of filling the chasm left by religion. Lest we miss the point, in 1854, the designers of the British Museum's new reading room specified that its vast central dome should have precisely the same circumference as St. Peter's in Rome. And here's a picture of the reading room at the British Library, or at the British Museum, sorry. A room that I've not been into. So I don't know if it's still there, if it's still a reading room, if it's accessible, but I'd love to check it out next time I'm at the British Museum. I've certainly seen the dome, and fascinating enough, I've seen the dome of St. Peter's as well, and it's fascinating to hear that they were designed to be the same size. That is an interesting little tidbit there that Mr. de Bottom has taken out here in the School of Life book. Other things that he's talking about, I've only read the first 30 or so pages in the introduction, is mainly about how we don't teach emotional education in not only just the United States, but in the modern world. We used to leave emotional education to the religions. Then we said, okay, well, you're not qualified anymore. Nietzsche comes along, God is dead, all that kind of thing happens. And as he's saying here, there was idea that stories could teach you the emotional things that you need. Plato and Sophocles, these other the playwrights, that you would read the stories and you would get the same lessons that you would get from a more organized religion. I'm not sure if that really played out or not, but we're in an interesting postmodern place where the religion doesn't raise us, the culture doesn't raise us, we don't learn about it. And on the other side, if you think about government and the lack of civics education, civics being the codes and the way that you act and the way that you participate in a democracy, the way that you have the option to, we stop teaching that as well. And it's interesting to see how stopping teaching these things, leaving a vacuum, leaving a void, has terrible results. It's fun because you don't know what's going to come out of the void, so it's interesting. And I want to talk more about things that are surprising and interesting later. Unterraschung, I think I'm close on that. That's surprise in German. But these different Unterraschungs in the world that surprise us because we're not taught about them. So yes, they leave a gap, some kind of mixture of modern culture that's somehow acceptable, something like Sesame Street, Barney the dinosaur, the Harry Potter books, maybe the Lord of the Rings, teach you how to be a citizen, teach you how to be a moral person, without ever saying directly that they're teaching you that, or without ever just being forthright. Hey, we're reading the Lord of the Rings so you learn what it's like to be a hero, so that you can picture yourself as a hero, with the hopes that maybe you'll act heroically in the future if you're confronted by a dilemma or a decision, right? A decision point, like in a video game. But yes, and maybe the video games are a big part of this that I'm not even talking about. I don't know if you learn a lesson playing Grand Theft Auto. I've never beaten enough of the missions to really feel I had a taste for it. The lesson is you can run around in the sandbox and do anything you want. Sounds like a fun lesson. Also, while we're talking about the lessons of video games, I definitely want to give a shout out to the brand new documentary High Score on Netflix. Check out the Netflix documentary High Score. It's just a great documentary about video games, kind of the 80s and 90s. A lot of focus was put on the rise of competitive gaming. And it was interesting to see how it starts so small as something like the 1990 Nintendo World Championships, and then it becomes something that I have no grasp on personally, like what's happening now with League of Legends and all these other games, and the teams. They have giant teams of players and giant arenas. We always thought that would happen. We always dreamed, and we always, we support the geek culture, playing Quake and Half-Life and all these things, Doom, and we really felt that it could. And for a while, there was a famous Quake player. I want to say his name was like Blez or Plez or something like that, but he was amazing. But that was back in the Quake days. But to see it really take off so much, so yes, definitely check out High Score. And what specifically brought me to that there, I was talking about moral education and the value of something like the School of Life. Definitely check out their YouTube videos. And if you'd like a book, get a book from Amazon, School of Life. Or go there if you're in the position. But moral education, the guy who designed Ultima, later Ultima Online, one of the first role-playing interactive video games, said that his goal was to make people into heroes, and that he wanted you to, given infinite and unlimited options, his theory was that you would pick up the sword and start acting heroically, that you would rescue the princess and so forth. But what he found is that when people actually played the games is that they acted like bastards, right? He looked around and he had a network full of bastards. So it's really interesting what he decided to do with Ultima 4 is that he would introduce a moral system where if you participated and you were a good citizen and you weren't out there rampaging and killing and ravaging and so forth, the prices at the shop would go down. People would help you. They'd give you magical artifacts. They'd help you along the way. The towns would welcome you. And if you didn't, if you were a total maniac, like a lot of people play in today's games, and it's fun to play a maniac, no doubt. But if, according to the film anyway, if you were a total maniac in Ultima 4, you couldn't even beat the game. The characters who have the items that you need wouldn't come to you. They wouldn't share them with you. They wouldn't sell them at the shop, so on and so forth. The game was unbeatable if you played immorally. It's a really interesting idea, and it's an interesting metaphor, and it might be the kind of thing that really teaches a good lesson. And that really when you go out there into the larger game of the real world, that you will want to cooperate and that you will want to think win-win, where both sides of the deal can come out all right. You don't have to destroy your opponent. You don't have to devastate them in order for you to win. It's a powerful lesson for a video game, huh? Let's see what else we've got here today. We're focused on books today. It can be books big and small. I'd seen a lot of these comic strips on the internet, so I decided to pick up a little collection of them, and they're great, even when just slamming through 20 or 30 of them at a time. These strips are called Strange Planet by Nathan W. Pyle, and they feature these weird alien characters. Let's see if I can show you some examples without losing my place. But here's one right here. I can't quite read it off the screen too, so it's kind of a simulated experience, but it says, "Whoa, Alex, you look damaged." And he says, "I was exposed to the nearest star." The guy says, "Jealous?" He says, "I feel more attractive." He says, "Honestly, you are." He says, "It's the star damage." And then the last panel, the guy says, "I crave star damage." So it's funny how they're talking about tanning, right? They're talking about the ridiculous idea that humans go outside and the sun affects their skin, some of them, and that they go tanning. So right here, here's another one. They've gone camping together, and it says, "Into the wilderness with nothing but a map to guide us." He says, "I desire medium danger." The guy says, "We could almost die over here." And he says, "This is moderately hazardous." They're climbing a mountain, and the guy says, "I am delighted." In the last panel, he says, "This is my preferred level of nature." He says, "Unsafe, yet highly recommended." So he's kind of making fun of the whole idea of humans going camping and the things that we do to entertain ourselves in the outside. And sure, you've heard these kind of things before, but he has a really good grasp on it with these space aliens. So definitely check out the strip Strange Planet He's got another book collection. I almost bought that too. I kind of wish I had. But very cool stuff from Nathan W. Pyle. And he also says, imagine pleasant nonsense. That is nice, isn't it? You could just imagine some pleasant nonsense. That's a nice way to spend a day, huh? I've got some other books here. I wanted to talk about maybe the book I'm reading right now, if I can bring up the different screen. There we go. So I'm reading, a bunch of books, as per usual. I suggest, I don't know if anybody likes to do this, but I like to read several books at the same time, like a serious science book, a good book with a narrative, a comic book like the one I just showed. And then what I do is I switch between them. So if I'm reading maybe the narrative book and it gets a little boring, I'll switch to the comic book. If the comic book, maybe I'm reading it too fast, or I'm going through many pages, I'll switch to the science book. That'll slow me down. One of the books I'm reading right now is kind of sciencey. It's another book from the School of Life. I know. While I was browsing their online books on Amazon, they sold me an ebook. So this ebook is only $6 in the Kindle store, and it's called How to Think More Effectively, a guide to greater productivity, insight, and creativity. So that sounds cool, right? Everyone wants to think more effectively, and especially if we can get it from the School of Life. And he talks here about reading and the kind of thinking that you do when you read. And he says, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant once credited the Scottish philosopher David Hume for teaching him how to think, but in a nuance to the usual such tribute, added that Hume had done this not by lending him a set of ideas with which he could agree with, but by laying out with elegance and precision a whole class of philosophical positions from which he passionately dissented. Reading Hume's inquiring concerning human understanding had, said Kant, woken him up from his dogmatic slumber and inspired him to arrange his objectives into what would turn out to be his masterpiece, the Critique of Pure Reason. We are all so much the poorer if all we can do is agree with the books we read. And it's a good message there that when you're reading a book, you don't have to agree with it, and that Kant here, who I probably disagree with, read Hume's book, disagreed with it so much, he wrote an entire book response that then became his masterwork. So disagreement can lead to interesting work as well. We need to be open to the option of disagreeing. As it says here, we are encouraged to start our own brains by evidence of the developed thought of another person. Once we start to read the book, the benefit to our own train of thought continues. We're used to imagining that it's the ideas explicitly stated in a book that will enrich us, but we may not need the full thoughts of another person to come to a better sense of what we ourselves believe. Often, just a few paragraph or even parts of sentences can be sufficient to provoke our minds and can nudge us to stop, daydream, and reach for a notebook in which we jot down not the thought that we've read, but the thought that it prompted inside us, which might be quite different and more significant. The book frames the topic for us. It puts the right question to us. It functions as the 3 dots that start us off, and we do the rest. So it really is interesting, the power of reading, the power of thinking, and how much mileage you can get from even just a few sentences, a few paragraphs, could cause you to come up with a completely different idea. You could agree with them, you could disagree with them, but the point is, read, challenge yourself, and try to find these occasions where you do have a thought. Then enhance that thought, write it down, play with it, Put the book aside. Think about your own thought for a while. That book makes you think about a utopia. Maybe it's not Thomas More's utopia. Maybe it's your utopia. That sounds like something worth thinking about, right? No one's going to give you that assignment, though. No one's going to say, hey, turn off the TV, sit down for 10 minutes, and think about your utopia. Think about your perfect world. And that's another thing that was talked about both in this book and in the School of Life book about the emotional learning that we're not taught. About the degradation of self-help books and the idea of self-help. Now, some of the self-help books aren't very good. The Just Do This in 10 Days and these kind of things, all the kind of number books, they're not very good. But the idea of self-help is a really great idea and probably the only place that help is going to come through. It's interesting, although he's probably gone now, but Seaside Thug here mentioned that this might be Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's an interesting point that drags us into this, where it could be by showing up and having those thoughts, you're joining a larger thing. You're becoming into something bigger. You're learning how to manage yourself. I missed it. I forget what it is. But I had a good thought there. Sometimes they don't all cash out. I've also started reading The Oral History of Saturday Night Live. I think this is going to be a good follow-up to my oral history pack here. I read the I Want My MTV oral history, and I read the Daily Show oral history, and now I'm going to start into the oral history of Saturday Night Live. I forgot where I was going with the Alcoholics Anonymous thing. Something about taking it a day at the time, or that we don't have the education. Self-help, the value of self-help. I think, I was going to in Alcoholic Anonymous, you have to give up your power and go to the higher power, and that's how you get control of the problem. In the same way, what I'm talking about here is that people have to, go for self-help and to put that horrible label aside and to find the self-help books that work for you and to find the voices that work for you. Clearly, I like the School of Life. He's very philosophical. He gets me to think about things. And I've definitely read a bunch of his books that would be probably considered self-help. I've read the series about, I think it was On Confidence. Then I read Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. And then I read a book about relationships and sex. So, but again, you want to learn these things. No one's going to teach you them. The TV is not going to stop and say, how is your emotional well-doing? Is there anything wrong in your head that you're not thinking about? But there are things like that. And if you think about those things and you need something else, getting aside from the word self-help and the bad things that come up when we say that, the genre of books that teach you to think about yourself and to think about your problems is a good genre and one worth checking out. So I think that's what I want to say. Shout out to Moonshine Fuel in the chat. He says he serviced his refrigerator, cleaned out the evaporator coils, the bathroom, and the stove. Sounds like you're clearing the decks, getting ready to think. I know when I try to think, I'll try to procrastinate and avoid it. But doing that kind of things, and especially stuff like the evaporator coil, stuff like that, detailed maintenance, like once a year maintenance, that's the best. Because once you get that done, the appliance or whatever it is going to run good for a year. It's going to run good for a long time. So it really does kind of clear things out. And he says in the chat that he does feel better. So I'm sure you weren't like sitting there at your desk thinking about the refrigerator coils, but now that they're clean, that's a good feeling. You can just chill out and relax. I know I had the same thing recently, not with a large consumer appliance, although I am doing my best to try to fix and break those at the same time, but with a backup hard drive. I had warned everyone. I said, hey, everyone, back up your drives. It's backup day, because I was doing it myself, and I always think, hey, if I'm backing up and someone else hasn't backed up, maybe I can warn them and spread the good backup karma and try to keep away from that bad no backup data loss karma. I made a second copy of my hard drive and I was feeling good. I had a brand new hard drive and I had the old hard drive that I didn't trust very well. And things were fine. Of course, I know the old system administrator's rhyme or poem or whatever it is that one is none, two is one, and three is two. And that's a good rule of thumb there, because what happened to me is my brand new backup drive started to show errors, and it actually brought up a scary message in Mac OS. And you know you got to be in trouble if you're getting scary messages in Mac OS, because that's a friendly operating system, right? They don't want to scare you, but sometimes they do. And the scary message that I got was something like, Finder or whatever cannot repair your disk. Your disk cannot be repaired. Backup, erase, and restore. And I was like, oh no, my beautiful brand new copy is having problems. So I did what I think any computer user would do. I plugged in my good trusty backup that'd been sitting on the floor doing nothing. It came up fine. Everything was all good. So then I proceeded to erase my new backup copy. Big mistake. Shouldn't have done that. Should have just bought a third hard drive. But again, that's something you learn. The erase went well. And then a second later, my original hard drive started showing the same error, that it could not be repaired and that it needed to be erased and backed up immediately, except that it wouldn't show me any of the files. So I was in a real pinch with my new backup drive erased, my old backup drive non-operable, and my heart went through the window and everything, and I screamed and all that. So fortunately, a friend of mine came over and somehow took the hard drive out of its external case and plugged it in and ran some strange Linux commands on it or whatever happened, and somehow the hard drive came back. So I immediately copied it to my spare hard drive. I've ordered a third hard drive. I think it might be on the porch right now. I need to check really soon. And then I'm going to back it up, so then I'll have 3 copies, and that'll be the same as having 2 copies, which means you can lose one and still have 1 copy. So it was terrifying. It could happen to you, especially right now if you only have 1 hard drive. Back everything up. Back it up to the iCloud. Back it up to Dropbox. Back it up wherever you want to back it up. Get a hard drive, get another hard drive. It used to be easier in the old days. You could burn DVDs of your backups, but now there's no more physical media. Everyone hates physical media. Apple, they went with the flash drives and the downloading instead of the Blu-rays. And we don't have a good physical, affordable media right now. And a hard drive is not the same as a Blu-ray or a CD. But back up your shit. Don't let it happen to you. Learn from my example. And thanks again to my friend who might be listening for fixing my hard drive, because that was a crisis. But yeah, books, hard drives, computers. I was going to talk about movies at some point, but maybe I'll do that another time. Certainly I want to recommend The High Score. High Score on Netflix. A great documentary about video games. I think we're heading towards the end of this show. It's coming up on an hour. So if you missed the beginning, you could always go back and check out the beginning. Be sure to check out the other shows we have here on the World Crypto Network. Although we can't travel, go to conferences, and bring you new interviews, we fortunately do have a lot of old interviews, some of which have never been released before. So we have the Unconfiscatable Bitcoin Conference, which was released as a really long live stream. But if you didn't catch the whole live stream, we went ahead and cut it up into parts. So maybe you could just watch the part you're interested in. Saying right here, I would definitely suggest part 19 with Trace Mayer. This is one of the last, might be the last, interview with Trace Mayer before he disappeared. So very strange, big Bitcoiner back in the day, Trace Mayer, the Mayer multiple. He was at the conference. We were all there. And later on, some strange stories surfaced about Trace maybe promoting the Mimblewimble altcoin. Maybe he'd bought too much of it and he was trying to sell. Maybe he was trying to get the price to pump. No one really knows why he would do this, but it seems that he did. And after this, instead of just responding to it, going on some other shows, talking about it, no big deal, whatever, a lot of people get seduced by altcoins, Trace completely disappeared. It was really strange because he was a lawyer. He seemed like an adult in the room. He was helping out in Wyoming to get laws passed with Caitlin Long to help Bitcoin and to help crypto assets, I guess. But yeah, to totally disappear when confronted just leaves us with very few options. It leaves us that he was horribly embarrassed. It leaves us that maybe he wasn't so rich the whole time. Maybe he's completely broke, had to go to work or something, or maybe he was scamming everybody the whole time. Nobody knows about Trace, but he's a good guy, and I wish he'd come back. I'd be glad to interview him fairly. But if you want, check out one of his last interviews right here from the Unconfiscatable Bitcoin Conference on the World Crypto Network. We've also got the BitBrum Conference, which we went to in Birmingham, United Kingdom. And those have never been seen before. So we have a series of interviews from BitBrum. The internet there wasn't great, so we recorded it to offline. Then it took a long time to get labeled and tagged, and we had a lot of other shows that were scheduled. It's amazing that we're into August here, almost September, with still some kind of new programs for you on the World Crypto Network. So check those out. You could also just listen to them in the background. A lot of them are just interviews. And for most of them, the sound is really good because I brought the board. So it costs a little extra. It was heavy to bring the board and all the microphones and everything all over Europe. But it really works out when you capture that good audio and when you have a nice interview that people can check out. So check out High Score on Netflix. Check out some videos here on World Crypto Network. Pick up a book if you'd like. There's a lot of good books out there. Checking in once more with the price of Bitcoin. Looks like it's gone up since we started this show. The price of Bitcoin is up 0.68% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 11,671, a high of 11,709, and a low of 11,538. That's $1 for 8,568 Satoshis. Volume was at 1,978 Bitcoins changing hands. The market continues to lean long, with 76% of the market heading that direction. Bitcoin dominance was at 59%. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and a share. If you haven't already, please subscribe down below. Hit the bell so you'll get notifications. Remember, if you don't click on the notifications, YouTube will stop sending them to you. It's a feature. If you really want to know when these shows are on, check out on Twitter at MadBitcoins or at WorldCryptoNet. We have a program Restream. It also broadcasts them on Twitter. That's a great way to find out that's going on. Then if you want to join YouTube, that's where the chat will be. YouTube's a great place to leave comments afterwards. Maybe you came along later after the show's over, but you want to comment. Feel free to comment on any of the books we read today or the price of Bitcoin or anything else that's in your mind in the comments down below. We would appreciate reading them. So thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, bye-bye.